Okay, great. So I'm gonna call the meeting to order. It is 6:33. Nice to see everyone. Sorry, I know the weather thwarted a lot of us from being there in person tonight. We have our consent agenda. We have prior minutes from the special meeting on March 20th, as well as a number of policy readings. Any discussion on any of those? Questions? Okay, then I'll make a motion to accept the consent agenda, and we'll do that by roll. Emily?
Aye.
Miranda?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Arlene?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye. Doesn't look that we have any visitors in the virtual realm. I can't quite see, the lighting's very dim in the library right now. So are there any in-person visitors for public comment?
No.
Okay, it's a little hard to see who's there in person. Okay, so moving on, that brings us to Lenny, to your school spotlight.
I'm just gonna flip this one just real quick. No. Okay. I think Ann structurally set this up for a little more mood lighting. Courtney or
Morgan's gonna do it.
Morgan, you wanna drive the bus for me? So the focus for my school spotlight is going to be around instructional coaching, and what I didn't write in here, but I'll start off at the start, is Lynn and I had spent some time looking at our school structure. This was in around this time last year, and we were able to carve out a space for an extra personnel without need to actually add a teacher that didn't have to teach a classroom, and we were able to leverage an incredibly skilled educator who was ready to be an instructional coach, Jess Litchfield, who was our award-winning kindergarten teacher. And so there's some pros and cons to what we ended up deciding, because we're taking an award-winning kindergarten teacher, which is one of the most, all teacher roles are essential, but that's the start of school, and there's some foundational learning there. But we knew that she'd be a great benefit to the rest of our system, and to therefore to all of our kids in a different manner if we had her become an instructional coach without having to add anything to our budget. So then this is our first year of having a full-time dedicated instructional coach in our school. And what I want to talk about today is what that looked like this year, and what we learned, what we accomplished this year, what she accomplished in her role this year, and then some ideas or thoughts about what to do moving forward. So next slide. So in this slide, just talking about, trying to frame a little bit of the why have an instructional coach, and a lot of this is actually relevant to the entire SU, but I kind of focus specifically on why would an instructional coach be useful and meaningful here at Berkshire. And we've been spending since I've gotten here, we've actually had these same conversations, like what can we do to ensure high quality first instruction, and then what can we do to kind of address or mitigate the teacher burnout or teacher turnover that we have. In an ideal way of thinking about it is like, what can we do to make teachers love this job and feel so supported that they don't either want to move on to a different profession, or also have them not leave our school. Some of this is a little bit outside of our control, because we are a rural school that's well away from other areas where people's partners might be. We've unfortunately lost some staff. I would say, tangential to this conversation, any staff who's ever left us hasn't left us because they didn't like working here, didn't love working in this community. It's often a very painful decision they've had to make that's relative to other elements of their life that they've had to choose to move away, and they're usually quite sad about leaving because of the special place that we have at Berkshire. So having said that, though, specifically what could an instructional coach help us address? It could help us particularly around high quality first instruction and the urgency around that, with the context of, at our school, particularly this year, all but 3 of our K-8 classroom teachers are within their first 3 years of teaching. So there's a lot of very new teachers. Anyone who's involved in the teaching profession understands like how tremendously challenging those first few years are. And if I had a gazillion dollars, I'd have every new teacher be an intern for a couple years and then slowly apprenticeship their way up to being a master teacher. But we don't have that luxury, so what can we do to lessen that learning curve so they don't get burnt out, they're effective, and they can also start teaching kids as effectively as they possibly can as soon as possible. And that, like I said, that high rate of turnover, showing the data, the past few years are actually smaller years. Some of that was COVID related. We had some people stay that might have left when COVID was kind of unfolding. We had 3 new hires 2 years ago, 3 new hires this past year, and we have at least 3 new hires anticipated for this year, and that's before teacher contracts come out and somebody might choose to move elsewhere. Hopefully not, but we have at least 3 more new teachers are going to be needing support. Next slide. So, with that in mind, what are the goals or the focus of the instructional coach? In the most broadest terms, it's going to be providing coaching to our teachers, but we thought about what do we specifically really want to achieve through instructional coaching at our school, so lessening that teacher curve. And I kind of try to identify what I mean when I say that, and the first piece, when I say indoctrinate the staff into the instructional expectations we have for our teachers, there's kind of 2 lanes to think about that. Lane 1 being, what is it we need to see them do as teachers when they're teaching math in our school? Do they understand how to do number corner? Do they understand how to implement math menu? Do they understand how to implement Lucy Calkins' Reader's Wise Workshop? Do they understand some of our expectations about never giving up on students and what that actually means and looks like? Do they understand how to utilize and leverage our multi-tiered systems of support? Do they understand how to look at data and help develop those small groups or targeted instruction or interventions? And there's a lot of kind of facilitating and building of that knowledge and that belief system that needs to be done in order to have them be the kind of teacher we need them to be for our students. And then item B, I highlighted and I italicized that part about effective professional development for teachers, and the reason why I did that is we can say we're teaching, just like we do with our teachers to our students, we can say we covered this, but that's not the same as saying they learned this. And when I jump into the next couple slides, I'm going to show you a lot of intentionally overwhelming information about what a new teacher needs, and why I say effective professional development is meeting the teacher where they are and giving them what they need to continue to grow versus get burned out. It's kind of like the idea of like if you build a house and the first thing you talk about is what your drapes are, and you don't think about the foundational underpinnings that need to make a sound house, that house is not going to be very effective. So how can we make sure our instructional coach, with support from me, is giving teachers the effective professional development so that they can actually be effective that day, they have a sense of efficacy, a sense of capacity, and a sense of potential to grow rather than struggle and struggle and struggle. And then the third piece of that with the instructional coach's support is build that staff's sense of effectiveness and their connectedness within the school community. So one of the things I'll mention later on is how having this instructional coach available and the effective partnership that they have had with our teachers has made those teachers feel far more connected and supported than they would have if we didn't have so much dedicated time and resources for them. Next slide. So this is a kind of quick summary of how things unfolded this year, and then I'm going to talk to a couple more specifics of what it looked like in action. So at the start of the year, we had the instructional coach provide some PD during our local in-service, and also identified throughout the year some dedicated professional development around specific things such as student-led conferences with our staff during our staff meeting times. We set up frequent observations with scheduled debriefing sessions, which initially started as bi-weekly, so you'd see, because we had so many teachers for her to see, she'd see like 3 or 4 on one Friday and then the next 3 or 4 on the following Friday. There was also an element of scheduling co-planning days, which could be full or half days. That was, I call it dedicated PD, but it was really more like dedicated support, but there was some professional development because she would be co-planning with the teacher, walking them through how to look at the units ahead and how to understand how to unpack and plan out that unit. So it was PD because they were going to be learning with her, but it was also coaching in the sense that she was teaching them how to effectively do that unit planning and unit designing and unpacking the resources that we have available. Because again, it's one of those things to give the teacher the resources and say, hey, here are the resources, you should be doing good teaching, versus, hey, here are the resources, let's make sure you know exactly how to use them so you don't get overwhelmed. There was a lot of providing general mentorship and teacher support. That could be, she was one of the key places where people might go to cry or to vent or to get support or ask questions. Obviously, I'm available for that too, and I think I have a disposition for that, but me being the boss, it's sometimes easier to go to somebody who's not the boss to maybe workshop what it is you might need from the boss. The big thing though that we realized is that last bullet point is we started the year with the idea of doing the gym night coaching cycle model. And there are a couple different times that Jess came to me and saying, do you want me to do coaching cycles or do you want me to be coaching the teachers? And I kind of was like, both, but we also need to, I think the idea of coaching is meeting them where they're at and then continue to move them forward with the goal of getting to these highly effective coaching cycles. But what we realized is there were a lot of fundamental basics missing for some of our teachers such that a coaching cycle wouldn't actually be effective. It wouldn't land the plane where we needed to as far as what they and the students needed at that time. So we kind of shifted to, instead of focusing on coaching cycles at the start, it was really focusing on coaching teachers to be able to understand and then be able to effectively apply the fundamental basics. Next slide. So these next 2 or 3 slides kind of outline, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I just kind of wanted to lay it out there about so many things that you need to have a really firm grasp of before you can even pretend to be able to give high quality actual instruction. So there was a whole bunch of classroom management work that we needed to do on. And so she mentioned doing a lot of work around building the first 6 weeks of school. And some of our teachers did have responsive classroom training, but even with that, we realized like just because they knew it, they didn't necessarily know how to do it. So how can we support them with that? Helping them understand how to do responsive classroom steps, working on rapport with students such as positive teacher language, how to build relationships with them. And then there was a lot of work around effective strategies, particularly for whole group instruction. We all as teachers know that's kind of one of the harder times to manage a class. You're like, this is the learning we need to do, but I'm stuck in front and Timmy in the back is messing around. How do I keep the lesson going forward while also dealing with Timmy in the back not being focused? And so she started working on building some of those skills that you just need to be told or learn and then practice them. I mean, basic things that we did have to work on was like, do you have turn talk partners? How did you assign them? Are you sure those two are going to be good turn talk partners? And the thing about, as one of those strategies, classrooms kind of getting a little goofy, you see a kid far away from where you are, how to structurally be like, you know what, I'm just going to create a random moment for turn talk. But really the purpose of it is allowing me to walk around the room and check in on Timmy and get him back into the class. So next slide. So on top of the basics around classroom management, there were some basics around instructional planning that Jess had to work through. And you can see there's a very large list of things that are fundamental to being an effective teacher that we mistakenly assume teachers might have whether they came from pre-service training or they had no pre-service training at all, which means they definitely don't have these things. So we had to go back and focus on coaching the teachers on things like instructional pacing, things like how to collect data, things like how to analyze the data, and she provided a lot of modeling and support with teachers on how to build different elements of the lesson, particularly focusing on the mini lessons. Next slide. And then there was also this other category of general teacher-related skills, coaching and supporting teachers on calling on students as far as like classroom, like when you're trying to have some sort of discourse, how to communicate home to parents, supporting with that. Strategies on how to effectively document behaviors in a timely manner. So you've got student A who was sent to the playing room. Part of our process and expectations is within 15 minutes, we should be receiving a referral that gives the playing room coordinator sufficient information to process and work with that student. But we also understand it's hard to find time to get on the keyboard or write it out while you're also trying to manage the lesson, and maybe there's 5 other kids who are also maybe struggling. So she helped provide some strategies around that as a veteran teacher. And then there's also this other piece about like how to get the materials for your classroom, you know, how to make sure you don't spend 2 hours building the classroom materials for your 2nd grade classroom. Sometimes that is necessary, but are there more efficient, effective ways to do it? And simple things like making copies, using the laminator, and then ordering materials, and also being mindful about like maybe you shouldn't use your $500 in your classroom budget on that. Maybe there's some other things that are going to get a little bit more bang for your buck to order. Next slide. So that was generally, all of those skills was generally a primary focus, is still ongoing for some of our teachers. But what she was mindful of is when a teacher was getting to a competent and confident place in that area, how could we then shift to start using some coaching cycles? So there were 4 teachers who have kind of gotten to that place of being ready to have a coaching cycle. And I think that concept of being ready is important. Like you can look at it one of 2 ways. Like our students need this level of high effective instruction, but at the same time, if we don't really support you and nurture you, you're going to feel failure and you're going to feel unsupported, you're going to burn out, and you might not want to stay here and you might want to stay in this profession. So we focused first and foremost on really building their sense of capacity and getting them to a place. All 4 of these teachers organically said, I am ready for a coaching cycle. I would like a coaching cycle. And here, now that I have a sense of my classroom, here's one of the things I want to focus on, which I think is really valuable for the sense of the teacher support and really valuable for them to be able to actually access that learning and gain from it, versus she would be able to say, and I would too, or many other veteran people could come into a classroom and say, here's the thing you need to work on. But if you're not in a space to even receive that because A, you don't think that's what you need to work on, or B, you don't understand your classroom well enough to see that this is what you need to work on, or D, you've got so many other things that you really want help with first and foremost before you're even ready to do that learning. So it was really great that we could see that our support was really working because we got to a place where teachers were then asking for more help. They were ready for more help. So one teacher was wanting to work on student engagement. She collected some data with that teacher. Then they did some research and some coaching on what to do to improve that engagement, and then they collected data later on and saw an improvement. Next slide. So another teacher wanted to focus on positive reinforcing language, and same thing, collected some data, did some strategy research, did some strategy implementation, did some reflection on that, and we saw another positive impact on student positive reinforcing language. And then the next slide, another teacher wanted to work on increasing their level of engagement during math menu time. So again, it was about collecting data, coming up with some ideas for next steps, applying those steps, getting some feedback on those steps, collecting further data, and again, we saw positive improvement around that goal. Next slide. Another teacher focusing on engagement and being on task during independent time, and same thing, there was the model of collecting some data, identifying some next steps in response to that data, applying those steps, and seeing some positive results. Next slide. So this is a very broad but quick summary of some positive impacts. I mean, the first and foremost positive impact is a lot of these teachers have gained a lot of those basic skills that without them, that classroom would not be an effective place of learning. But with all the coaching support she's given, there was a high sense of support from the instructional coach. I think we know I could get anecdotal statements from teachers saying, like, I don't know how I could get through this year without her. And I'm going to skip the last slide because it's kind of just bragging about some positive things, but one of the really awesome things we've seen as an impact from this is we've seen some of these new teachers that came in with not a lot of skills doing things that we sometimes have a challenge seeing veteran teachers do, and some of them are doing it organically, like the shared reading, conferring, and effectively setting up small group instruction. So we're already moving from foundations to really doing high quality, effective first instruction. And then you can look at the last slide and we can move on. Any questions? So the quick summary is like, it's the really selfish thing would say she didn't get to any of our veteran teachers, and she couldn't because she's been spending so much time with them. Like, selfishly, again, if I had $1 bazillion, I'd say we need at least another one, and I would probably say all the other schools need lots of instructional coaches, but just finding ways to have these instructional coaches in our school and having one dedicated specifically to our school, I think has been tremendously powerful and important for us.
So Lynn, how are we on instructional coaches in the other 3 schools? Do they all have that same kind of support?
So we have SU level instructional coaches, so at the same time that Lenny made this move, we made the move in the SU to focus our efforts on having instructional coaches. We don't have the, he had an internal one. When we post for things like this, we don't get candidates for these positions. We have some that were kind of coach/intervention in many of our schools, and what we learned was that most of the time people end up spending all of their time on intervention because of the needs of the kids. Sandy has a part-time instructional coach in Montgomery. Rhoda had a position that was vacated. Sheldon, we did not replace an instructional coach model in favor of having the intervention, the focus be on the intervention, but instead we use the SU level to push in. So I think the model, we're getting some positive results with the model, certainly. And I appreciate you sharing about how it's going with Jets, Justice.
Is it a number issue not finding people? Because I know Bakersfield also was lacking interventionists because they couldn't
Yeah.
find,
We have the money,
yeah.
we do not have the workforce.
personnel, yeah.
Yeah.
I will just say, sorry, Lenny, just real quick, Arlene, that we've had 3 of those SU coaches. They've all been in our building this year, and they've done a terrific job, and they're there at least once a week.
And same for the other schools, the other 2 about the same? If they're able to get in?
So they're assigned only to the new staff, like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the focus, and that's
Yeah.
what ended up, that is where
Yeah.
we should be putting our emphasis for right
Yeah.
now, new or staff that is struggling, we would assign someone if they're struggling, but I'm hearing positive feedback from the people who have been coached and also from the leaders of the buildings that they've been coached in, so we've really put them into every building, so we're
Excellent.
coaching at all levels.
Nice.
Thank you, Lenny.
How'd I do it for time? I heard some clicking.
I was clicking at the end, but you
Okay, all right. I heard.
You
I
did
sped up the
great.
last 3. I was like, I think I heard the clicking this time. I think that's not by accident.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lenny. Appreciate it. So moving on, Morgan, you're up with your financial report.
Okay, the March financial report went out to you by email earlier today. I took a quick look at it. There are no concerns that I have there. We still have a few tuition bills that we have not received for high school kiddos that I anticipate, but given where we were after the first semester, I think we're gonna have a good amount of money left over, primarily because of high school tuition. Hopefully those other ones will drop in the next few weeks, and we'll have a firmer predicted number next month. And that's, I think that puts us in a good position to try to get an early start on some of the building projects that Vern is trying to line up for the summer. So to the extent that we can get work done before June 30th and get those bills paid, that comes out of this year's budget, and so it's something that we don't have to worry about next year if the tuition kid amount gets turned on its head. So I don't know if anybody had a chance to look at that, but I'm happy to answer any questions on the March report.
So once again, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I was noticing that in it, there's an item for co-curricular, extra co-curricular, and field trip. If you could just tell me what the difference for co-curricular, extra co-curricular, and field trips might be.
So field trips, my understanding is field trips are something that like happens during the day off campus.
Okay.
Co-curricular would be more activities after school.
And the extra co-curricular,
They're kind of lumped together.
Together.
Extra / co-curricular.
because they're just in 2 different spots, okay.
Yep. And I don't, it's not a big dollar amount. I don't know how great we are at categorizing from one to the other when those come into us, because
Yeah.
we don't look at a bill and we don't know. The FY24 information in my report is primarily just informational, unless Lisa has an update on where the yield number is now. It's basically the same level of where we warned a budget, which is a good position to be in. And then I put in your report that the town of Sheldon appealed the determination of their CLA. That appeal was successful, and so the local Sheldon rate is going to be down about 2 cents from what we warned, assuming nothing else changes in the legislature. And then Vern and I are going to give 2 updates in Sheldon. The first one is around the temporary classroom space. We met with the winning contractor on Monday to do a site visit. That was after some surveys that Lynn and Courtney did with the staff on placement of the modular in relationship to the school, and then placement of classes in the modular. And so I don't think we're going to tip who's going out in the modular yet, but Vern and I had a disagreement on where the modular should be placed, and the staff was about 3-1 in favor of Vern's placement. So we're going to be going off the planning room there, and we need a few specs from the contractor, and then we will put out a bid for the concrete work, and we will be trying to get that done as soon as possible. And so there'll be some, I guess that would be extracurricular activity for the students to watch on that side of the building, but we're gonna try to get that done so that we have as much lead time for the mod folks. Now, Vern, is there anything I missed on that?
I think you pretty well hit on everything.
Okay. And then I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to let Vern do most of the talking on this, but we were approached by the select board in Sheldon to help them explore a better traffic situation for Sheldon Elementary. And for folks who are familiar with the building, especially around pickup and drop off, we know that it's a real, there are a lot of problems there. So we have jointly contracted with the Sheldon Select Board to do an engineering study. And Vern, if you talk, I can run the mouse.
You have the pointer? Okay.
Yep.
So, we met with Steve Dodd. Seth was involved in the beginning stages, and the town is definitely on board as far as relocating the entryway. I was fortunate enough to sit there one morning and watch a few of these cars come up Poor Farm, and it was pretty apparent that we needed to do something. So we talked about cutting in a T right here, and the road is going to travel towards the sugar house, and then it will kind of branch off and follow kind of that line right there, and we're going to reconnect down a ways back onto Poor Farm, which basically will take Poor Farm Road right out of the picture. The benefits of this is, number one, making a much safer parking lot, number one, and number two, I think the other important thing is it's going to help us add parking spots to the make more available parking spots to the school. And I think we're going to implement maybe getting the lower parking lot paved, cleaned up, and just making a much safer parking lot for the people. It's a dirt parking lot currently, and we've got better ice there some days than the Collins Pearly does. So we want to make sure that we can make a safe environment for our teachers to park and get to the school safely.
Is the extra parking that you're talking about?
Well, where the existing is now, we're going to go out towards. We're gonna have that space.
So that section's gonna move over into that lot.
Correctly.
So
Yep,
that'll all
right.
be parking because you need it.
Yes,
It's
desperately.
Yeah.
So currently we're waiting. I was hoping I was gonna have something to present tonight from Cross Consulting. We kind of put them on another project. We gave them two decent-sized projects, and they're both time-sensitive. So they got one done, and they aren't quite ready for a presentation or to give us something for this. So as soon as I have something to present, I will, and hopefully be able to get. This is something that's not going to happen this year. This is a next year project, but it's going to take a while to get everything in line to make this happen. But like I said, sitting there that morning, it was very apparent to me that we needed to do something. I don't know how long this has been going on, but it's a huge safety issue.
Vern, can you talk a little bit about bus lanes and
Yeah,
that too,
we're-
safety?
We talked about, and again, I spoke to Pete Garso, and he's got a design. We talked about how we wanted to have the bus lanes in, and we're not quite. To be honest with you, I don't know what he's going to bring back with. But we're trying to make a smooth transition to be able for these buses to to be able to unload the kids and then make a safe way to get out of the parking lot. Right now, every morning they basically set up cones to make a safe unload for the kids that are riders and the bus. And they do a great job, don't get me wrong. They get those kids out of the cars and across the sidewalk very nicely. But I think when it's all said and done, we're going to have a much smoother transition with unloading kids and also buses.
With parent pickup and drop
Yes,
off at
yeah.
the same time.
Yes.
So, yeah, and the current map, for those that don't know, this is 105, and then this is Poor Farm Road that comes through, and people do kind of come bombing through here. And given all the parking you have over here and how close this parking area is, you basically have a road running through your campus. And so the hope, and the engineers might come up with a couple of different solutions, but when we go and look at it and look at the work that had been done in the past, it seems to make sense to have Poor Farm Road basically move like this, and then you've got this whole campus area that's isolated from it, and that'll be much safer for pedestrians coming up from this parking lot, and it'll, as Fern mentioned, it'll open up some parking possibilities up here above this swale.
We're also pretty certain that we can still maintain that field at some level. I don't think we're going to lose that field. So I'm excited to see what they come back with. As I said, the town of Sheldon has been super supportive of this, and we're kind of working in collaboration with them, and I think it's going to turn out to be a fairly decent project. The one main thing, I don't know the school as well as you do, but I'm assuming as Poor Farm grew up, that traffic became a problem. And, I hadn't been down there forever, and there's a lot more houses
Yeah,
down
it's
there.
definitely
So,
worked on that.
yeah.
Is Poor Farm a through road or a dead end?
Dead end.
Dead end, yeah.
And how many people live back there?
Oh, man. I've never been past the Maple Glen part,
Yes.
but I would say probably a dozen at least, dozen houses. But there's companies down there now. There's a big sugaring business.
Yeah.
Family,
Farms.
this is Family Tree operates a business out of there. So there's a lot of trucks. There's loggers that go down there as well. Most of the land on Poor Farm, for the most part, at least towards the front of it, is just owned. It's just undeveloped land that's just kind of sitting there, but you can see towards the end there's more life at the end, if you will.
Yeah.
Um,
Who's going to bear the brunt of the cost for this? Is this the town of Sheldon? Is this the district? Is this a combined fiscal effort?
At this point, we're splitting the engineering costs at this point right now. I've got a do not exceed. Pete Garso gave us a number, and I reached out to Steve to see if the board accepted that, and they said they did. However, they would like to know if it exceeds that cost, and then we would talk about it. But at this point right now, we're splitting everything right down the middle.
I think Mary's question might be about that actual, like, when the project happens. Do you want to talk a little bit about the funding that the town has?
Not comfortably.
Okay.
Not comfortably.
So maybe we'll stay tuned for that.
Yeah, I think the hope is that we're going to be able to look at it and say, okay, these costs are really about moving the road, and then these costs over here are about doing the site work to what's become now part of the school. The town is trying to secure funding through the transportation grant world, and so I think when I look at this, my guess is that they will have the bulk of the bill, but they will also have revenue sources to cover that.
They being the town
They
of
being the
Sheldon.
town, yeah.
Yeah.
Because at some point, the engineers are gonna come and they're gonna say, okay, here's what we recommend, and we're pricing it out this way, and then both the district and the town are gonna have to then have those conversations about, okay, where is the line drawn, and how is each party paying for their portion.
And I'm assuming that the road predates the school and the purchase of the land for the Sheldon School.
I don't know the history of it. I assume that the Poor Farm was there before the school building.
We know when the school was built.
I only asked just because it's kind of an interesting quandary about, and then, you know, who bears the brunt of the financial. I mean, it's not going to be a cheap project, building roads, even dirt road. So, but I mean, I see all the reasons why it should happen. It is kind of it definitely seems hazardous.
And it's super dangerous. I think the other piece is just the parking itself. So we're such a large school in terms of the number of kids we have. When we have like a school event, at this point, cars, both parking lots are totally filled. People are parking down Poor Farm Road on that dirt section. They're additionally parking all the way down to where it connects to 105, and cars are parking all the way almost to Durkee's store. It's creating a huge safety hazard on 105 itself. I mean, with that many kids in a school, when we have a holiday concert or any sort of event, it's chaotic and super dangerous.
And so to that end, with the engineering that's happening right now and all this preliminary stuff, and you may have said this and it's a little hard to hear the audio, are we exploring a better expanded parking lot situation so that some of those issues that Emily just highlighted will no longer be a concern?
Yes.
I mean, it must be very dangerous to be parked on 105 all the way down toward the gas station.
Yeah, we think we'll have to see what the plans are, but we think it'll give us more area to use for parking, and it will give us the ability to make the area that we have work a little more efficiently as well.
Yeah.
We made it pretty clear to Peter at Cross that parking is essential, and so he just did another little project for me. He was able to add 2 or 3 or 4 more parking spots. So I think, like I said, I'm sorry I didn't have this anything to present tonight, but he just wasn't quite ready for us.
Oh yeah, no, that's all good.
Yeah.
This is super helpful. It's very helpful to have this aerial view too. It's great. Thanks, Vern.
Yeah.
And unless you have questions, I think that's it for my report.
Great. Thanks, Morgan. Appreciate it. So Lynn, that brings us to you.
Okay. So I'm going to start with personnel. There have been a few changes since we sent out the board report, so I am going to read it this time. So under hiring, we have Rachel Huff has been hired in Bakersfield to be the new SU LEAPS site coordinator. We're very excited about that. So that's just informational because that will be an SU position.
Is that just for the remainder of this year or
No.
next year?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we're very excited. It was a good find, Rhoda.
Agree.
In Berkshire, we have 2 hirings. I'm going to go through all of them and then ask you for a motion at the end. 2 staff, Gavin Roddy, principal, and Hannah Joyle, grade 2. In Sheldon, Sean Stebbins. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Sean Stebbins, and I'm going to actually I should do it now. So we advertised that as a Dean of Students position, and then you approved that as a board. I'm going to ask you to reverse that because one of the things that was not visible to me at the time is that if Sean were to work as a Dean of Students, there would have been an impact on his teacher retirement because the Dean doesn't require the administrator license. We would have had to have moved him into a municipal retirement system. So Sean is willing to go get the endorsement to be an assistant principal. So he meets the criteria to be provisionally licensed as an assistant principal. So I'm going to recommend that when you approve this, you also approve that we shift his title to assistant principal. That makes the most sense, and he doesn't lose out on that ability to pay into teachers' retirement. Marie Jackson has been hired for grade 3, Polly Anna Gregory, grade 5, Sarah Lunger, grade 5, Meredith Vincent, grade 6, and Mara Dan Weber, middle school ELA. Informational for Sheldon, Amy Schwanier for pre-K paraeducator, and Tim Bushy for custodian. So it asks you probably for 2 separate motions. One is to shift from the Dean of Students model at Sheldon back to the assistant principal model, and then to approve the hiring of those licensed educators.
Lynn, I'd just like to say something about the Dean of Students versus the assistant principal. I have no problem doing this time, but in the future, I really don't want us to set a precedent that we're going to do this based on the individual who accepted the job or who we chose the job for the job. Because it was advertised as one thing, and we had some significant discussion ahead of time about the reasons why we wanted a dean of students versus an assistant principal, and there were some really good reasons. So I just want to say I'm a little bit uncomfortable with doing this. I know we have a good candidate, and good candidates are really hard to find. So I'm willing to let it go this time, but I just wanted to make sure you all understood that we can't keep doing this in the future.
I agree with you, Lisa, and in hindsight, I wish I had attended to that, because it wouldn't have mattered who we hired. If it was someone who was in education, which we would want someone who's in education, it wouldn't be anything that if people were attending to their financial health at their retirement, it wouldn't be anybody from the state of Vermont that we would have been able to hire without them being negatively impacted. And that part was not visible to me. It should have been, but it wasn't. So I apologize for missing that detail, and I will not make this a habit.
So I'll go ahead and make the motion then that we are going to have that hire for Sheldon be an assistant principal position instead of a dean of students position. And we'll do that by roll. Emily? So, thank you. Lisa?
Aye.
Miranda?
Aye.
Erin?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Arlene?
Aye.
And Mary is an aye. And then we have, I'll make a second motion to, for the hiring. Lynn, do you want me to name each of those candidates?
I don't think you need to. You could do it as per,
Yeah.
the report
Okay,
that I
as
just gave
per,
you.
Lynn's discussion earlier, I'll make a motion on all these new hires. By roll, Emily,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Erin,
Aye.
Miranda,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Arlene,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye.
Okay. Thank you. So resignations, Lauren, I can't say her last name.
GM Pietro.
GM Pietro, grade 3 through 5 reading teacher at Berkshire. Rebecca Jacobs, an LPN para, that's informational for Montgomery. Joel Bestie, the PE teacher at Sheldon, resigned to take another position in a different field. So that is effective April 7th. So that I'm not going to ask you to make a motion on that, because that is a broken contract in that situation. Michelle Bolio for librarian at Sheldon. Bailey DeForge, who was a teacher at Sheldon who was on a 1-year leave of absence. Ashley Lange, also a teacher on 1-year leave of absence. And Joanna Giroux, social worker, SAP counselor. So and Daniel Parody, informational custodian in Sheldon. So I'll ask you for approval to act on those resignations.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Emily. By roll, Miranda,
Aye.
Erin,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
Arlene,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye.
Your open positions at Bakersfield, we're currently looking for grade 2 math and literacy interventionist and a long-term sub for the school nurse for the spring, Rhoda. It's for later in the spring, correct, Rhoda? I don't think she's here. In Berkshire elementary teachers, is it one that we have right now?
We had one who resigned, and then we have the other one.
Okay.
I don't know if both of
So
those.
we have
and we
two
just,
right now,
And we put in
and-
for a hiring today,
Okay.
potentially.
We will have 2 in a paraeducator position. In Montgomery, we have part-time paraeducator / bus monitor, Sandy. You're muted. Sandy, you are muted.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
It was actually, we had an opening for a paraeducator to attend the LEAPS program with a student that required a one-on-one.
Okay, all right. And so Montgomery's also looking for an LPN. Sheldon is looking for paraeducators, a PE teacher for next year, and a librarian for next year. The NMV has 2 positions open that were approved in your budget, the technology integrationist position. There were interviews today. An offer has been made to a candidate. I think that the principals involved were pretty excited. I'll have a name for you at the next board meeting. We don't have a signed contract yet, so I'm going to hold on that. We have a couple of candidates for a health teacher position in NMV, so we'll be leaning into interviews for that coming soon for NMV. We had one of the strategies that we talked about across both districts and the supervisory union around teacher retention was the early contract signing retention bonus. That was a strategy that was approved by all 3 boards so that we could have an early indication about who was returning to FNESU. So I asked our HR director for a little bit of data before this meeting. So Morgan, while I'm saying this part, if you could try to remember how many contracts went out on Monday, that would be helpful. So on day 1, 45 contracts were returned. On day 2, 52 contracts were returned. And on day 3, 31 contracts were returned for a total of 128 contracts overall after 3 days.
It was about 213, 214.
Okay. So it's a good amount. More than half of the teachers that we have in the SU have signed within the first 3 days. So if you remember, they have until Friday at 4:30 to be eligible for the early signing bonus. And that strategy has certainly been received favorably by our returning teachers. So I'm hopeful that that will be an effective strategy. I think our principals are appreciating knowing sooner rather than later because we're still right in the middle of the hiring season rather than not knowing this until the end of May. So the move in the contract with negotiations to the earlier date and this early signing bonus, I'm hopeful that this is going to position us in a much better place around hiring this year.
Lynn, how does that compare to previous years when we didn't have this early sign-on bonus?
So I don't have data for that, Jamie. Lisa, I didn't ask Jamie for that information. My sense is we had a lot more contracts in than we typically do. I know on day 1, Jamie's impression was she was surprised how quickly and how many came back on day 1. I didn't get a sense, I don't know if you have, Morgan, about having 128 at this point. I feel like it's a lot more than we would typically have.
Yeah, I think it's a lot coming in a lot earlier. What we might be able to get for you from last year is an idea of how many people requested the signing extension because they didn't have to have a reason for that other than they just wanted to take the extra 2 weeks.
previously, the last 5 years, I've received many more requests by this point in terms of the number of people who are asking for the additional 2 weeks. And at this point, I only have one request for an extension to signing. Now, they have 15 days, to sign. So I think that they're due on the 17th, 16th or 17th, somewhere in that range. So they have a little more time to sign without asking for the extension. If they ask for an extension, they'll get to May 3rd, but that still gets us many days. We capture many more days in the hiring process just by those subtle changes.
Thanks. I just want to make sure our money is well spent doing this. If we're going to do this new initiative again, just making sure that it really is making a difference.
So we have one request for unpaid leave. So when people run out of sick leave, if they're licensed educators, they need to come to the board to request unpaid leave. So you have one teacher, Eva Valenta, who works here at Berkshire, who has something that can't be moved, and she is going to be short 1/2 of a personal day. So she is asking permission to take that extra half day as an unpaid day. So that will require board action.
Any discussion on that? And I'll make the motion to accept the half unpaid personal day for Ava Valenta. I roll. Emily,
Aye.
Lisa,
Aye.
Miranda,
Aye.
Aaron,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Arlene,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye.
Now I'm going to shift into school calendar. So in your board packet, you had a link to the 2023-24 school year calendar. Your link was incorrect.
I
So-
did it differently.
All
I
right.
put it differently.
You put it, okay. So you should have the right one in your link then. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this calendar is very similar to the calendar that you approved last year. There are still the 3 early release days that we have embedded into the calendar that we use this year for professional learning for teachers. The reality that we face post-COVID is very different than the reality that we faced pre-COVID. We had opportunities that I don't think we fully appreciated pre-COVID. We had the ability to provide regular professional learning to our educators in FNESU through our academy model, where schools were able to hire substitute teachers, so all of those first grade teachers could come out. We could do regular ongoing professional learning with each grade level, each content group within the SU. Post-COVID, we do not have the workforce to be able to do that. We don't have substitute teachers that we can utilize to cover classes. So there is no embedded time to be providing ongoing professional learning. And there is also no embedded time for us to, because of being short-staffed, for us to be able to provide time for teachers to have meetings with their colleagues, professional learning community team meetings, educational support team meetings, and MTSS planning team meetings. So one of the concepts that the FNESU board was presented with earlier this fall was the idea of using a model that's being used in many schools across Vermont, and that is the idea of having a 1 hour early release each week on a particular day. So embedded in this calendar is also on Tuesdays, students will be released 1 hour early so that teachers will be able to have extended professional learning time. That's a day of the week that they also have staff meetings. So they'll be able to have 2 full hours where there could be professional learning for staff. And given the turnover that we have with our staff, Lenny actually gave a really good demonstration of that you have a K through 8, a pre-K through 8 school, and only 3 teachers who have taught more than 3 years, that we need the time with our teachers to be able to do the professional learning, and this is one way to get at that time, and also to give them that time they need to be working with their colleagues to be able to plan for the interventions that are needed with students, and to plan for really effective first instruction. So that model will allow us to do that. The model also allows us to connect it to the LEAPS program, so we'll be able to start the LEAPS program an hour early on those days, so that students will be able to run right into LEAPS. So we know that will be something that some families will need. So we're trying to be really thoughtful about it, and we have not chosen to move forward with this kind of a plan in the past, but we're really at that place where if we really want better outcomes and continue to focus on improving our impact on our students, we need that time with our teachers. So that's what is embedded in there. So are there any questions on that calendar? So if there are no questions, Mary, I would ask that we would be looking for a motion to approve the 23-24 school year calendar.
Great, I'll make that motion. By roll, Lisa,
Aye.
Branda,
Aye.
Erin,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
Arlene,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye.
So I'm going to shift. We've already done number 4. That was the leadership model piece for Sheldon. I'll shift into number 5, legislative update. So I'm only going to focus on, although there are a lot of things that are still in the works in Montpelier, I'm going to focus on 3 big things. 2 big things and one thing I had reported out to you last month that I just want to follow up on. The first is PCB testing. We've talked a lot about PCB testing at the board level. I've wanted you to be really aware of, what's coming down the road for us. There's serious discussion happening in Montpelier about delaying the PCB testing. There's a school construction bill, H486. In that bill, they propose to delay the PCB testing until the report from the School Construction Aid Task Force is submitted. Essentially what there are several pieces. One is there has been some struggle with the load of testing that they had planned for PCB, and to be able to have the appropriate number of vendors to do that and workers to do the remediation is a little more challenging than I think anyone anticipated. The second piece of that is there is a whole task force studying whether or not there's a way for us to get school construction aid back online. We haven't had that since the early 2000s, and we have a lot of schools with a lot of deferred maintenance that needs to be attended to. So in addition to that task force, there's also been the facilities study. So I think that the thinking behind that is to delay the PCB until we get more on that facility study and we get more on whether or not there'll be school construction aid that can be used for some of this. Last month I talked to you about the pre-K bill, and that was around the proposal of having 4-year-olds really centered in the public school and having that come under the AOE umbrella, and not have the Agency of Human Services connected to the 4-year-old pre-K programs, and having that birth to 3 fall under the Agency of Human Services umbrella. That is not likely to go anywhere during this legislative session, so I just wanted to follow back up on that piece. The bill that I am most closely watching right now, and I know Morgan is really closely watching this, is H483. And this is an act that's relating to the accountability and oversight of approved independent schools that are eligible to receive public tuition. So there was a Supreme Court decision called Carson v. Macon that ruled that you can use public tuition dollars to spend on religious independent schools. So the bill is really contending with clarity around one is around equity and making sure that we have non-discriminatory, if we're going to use public funds to pay for independent schools, that there are non-discriminatory enrollment practices, and also that the accountability measures and the oversight connected to those schools is the same as our public schools. So that bill is really focused on that. At this time, it's passed through the House, and it's had its first read in Senate yesterday. It's in Senate Education Committee at this point. So there is a video. Mary and I spoke about this, and I have a video that I'm going to show tonight. I don't usually do this in board meetings, but I think that this bill is important enough. And I think that as board members, and as administrators, it's really important for you to understand the impact on the education fund and on the tuition that you pay out, and the impact that increasing the average cost for tuition, the impact that could have on your district budget. So I'm going to show this video. I think it's probably going to be right around 20 minutes. I apologize for the length, but I think it's really important background information for you to have. I don't believe we have anything that's going to take us incredibly long after this video. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen at this point. Oops.
Markets. Find something new, something.
Hi, my name is Neil Odell, and I'm a school board member in Norwich, Vermont. The recent Supreme Court decision in Carson v. Macon has implications for Vermont's tuitioning system. In a previous presentation, I covered the history of Vermont's school voucher system. In this follow-up presentation, I covered the financial implications of Vermont's tuitioning or voucher system. Let's dive in. Tuitioning in Vermont is part of our education funding system, so I wanted to take some time to cover how Vermont's education system is financed. Vermont's education fund is the source of revenue for all pre-K through 12 education in Vermont. This includes add-ons, which we'll cover in a bit. For fiscal year 24, the education fund is projected to have just over $2 billion. The Ed Fund receives revenue from multiple sources, and this pie chart shows you what they are and the amounts based on a forecast from Vermont's Joint Fiscal Office provided in December of 2022. As you can see from this chart, it's not all property taxes. The Ed Fund receives 100% of the sales and use tax in Vermont, 1/3 of the purchase and use tax, 1/4 of the meals and rooms tax, and all of the lottery revenues. There's also a Medicaid transfer and a handful of smaller revenue sources. The remainder comes primarily from the non-homestead and homestead property taxes. So when one or all of those consumption-based taxes runs short or demands on the education fund increase, the balance needs to be made up in the property taxes. So let's drill down on the homestead property tax. So how do we determine how much money needs to be raised by property taxes? In order to answer that question, it's important to understand that while local school districts determine how much they spend on education, it's the state's responsibility to guarantee that the money is there. Put another way, local school districts and their voters approve local school budgets, but it's the state's responsibility for funding those approved budgets. So in order to determine how much money needs to be raised by the property tax, the state totals up the amount of all voter-approved school budgets, adds to that amount any other obligations on the education fund. Those were those other obligations that I mentioned earlier. We take that total, then subtract out all of the other revenue sources, leaving behind the amount that needs to be raised via property taxes. So, we now know how much needs to be raised by property taxes. How do we get to the local property tax rate? While the education property tax calculation is notoriously complex, at its core, property tax rates are based on education spending per pupil. All other things being equal, when a school district spends more money per pupil, budget to budget, their tax rate will go up. As we mentioned in the previous slide, because the state is responsible for funding all voter-approved budgets, they also have a hand in setting a key number that impacts the tax rates in every town. It's a figure called the property yield number. By definition, the property yield number is the amount of per pupil spending that a $1 tax rate will generate. That $1 rate will generate a different amount of revenue each year depending on the state's grand list value and the health of the education fund. In the tax calculation formula, this yield number is divided into a local district's per pupil spending to determine the nominal tax rate. The yield number is set annually by the legislature at the end of the legislative session when most all of the education fund obligations are known and the revenue from other sources is considered. So while the property tax rate in your town is influenced by your local spending, it's also influenced by the voter-approved budgets in school districts all across the state. So, to recap, local property taxes are influenced by a few factors. Local education spending per pupil, so voter-approved budgets divided by the number of pupils, but also statewide spending in education, which influences the yield number that local districts apply to determine their local tax rates. So what goes into those voter-approved local budgets? Well, that depends on whether you're an operating town or a tuitioning town. For districts that operate their own public schools, their local budget is their expenditure budget, or the amount it costs to operate their school or schools. For districts that tuition some or all of their students, the cost for tuitioning those students to other schools is included in the proposed budget. And these tuitioning costs can vary. The amount of allowed tuition depends on the destination school for a given student and is outlined in Vermont statute. The tuition cost to send a student to another public school in Vermont is the full tuition charged by that public school. In most cases, this is the net cost per pupil. The tuition cost to send a student to a private school equals the average announced tuition as set by the Agency of Education and is determined yearly based on the average cost per pupil at Vermont public schools. For K through 6, that figure is currently $16,020, and for 7 through 12, it's $17,278. But there are some exceptions to these. Some schools are allowed to charge more for tuition. They're allowed to set their own rate if the school meets or assures that it will substantially comply with education quality standards, or if the school is considered a state-approved school as the result of designation, or if the school operates a career and technical center, or if the electorate votes to approve a tuition amount. But most towns in Vermont do not tuition their students. So how much money are we really talking about? This graph gives you an overview of where the money is going and how many kids are represented in those figures. The graph here is based on fiscal year 21 data, which is the most current that we have. Numbers on the left y-axis are the number of students, and on the right we have the cost in millions of dollars. On the far left, you can see that just over 2,400 students are using public money to attend another Vermont public school, accounting for almost $40 million. To the right of that is Vermont private schools, which are receiving just over 2,800 students for just over $45 million. Next are the students going to public schools in another state. That's about 560 students for a cost of almost $11 million. And finally, students going outside of the state to private schools, both nationally and internationally. That's just over 100 students at a cost of just under $1.5 million. So, What if these tuition costs go up? One recent example and a hypothetical analysis could provide some indication of what could happen if tuitioning costs increase as a result of more private schools becoming eligible for taxpayer funds. Back in April of last year, Vermont Digger reported that the Agency of Education has approved Sharon Academy as an independent school meeting education quality standards, or EQS. As a result, Sharon Academy is allowed to set their own tuition rate. The increase, almost $1,700 per student, has some school districts that tuition to Sharon concerned. Both the superintendent and board chair for the White River Valley Supervisory Union reported to the state that the change in tuition rate would have a negative impact on the supervisory union, potentially driving up per pupil costs and increasing the tax rate. Let's dig into a hypothetical example that shows the potential impact. Let's say a tuitioning town sends 100 students to a nearby Vermont public school. The receiving school's per pupil costs are $15,000 per student, so the sending town spends $1.5 million, and the receiving school sees $1.5 million in revenue. The receiving school had 150 of their own local students. So with the 100 tuition students, the total student body is now 250 students. The total budget for the school is $3,750,000, which equates to a per pupil spending figure of $15,000. Now, let's say that the tuitioning town sends 25 of those 100 students to a nearby private school. The private school charges the same tuition rate as the public school, $15,000 per student. The public school now receives 25 fewer students, and with that, a loss of $375,000. They now have a decision to make. They can cut the budget to make up for the loss of revenue. This may require cuts in staffing or programming. Or they can maintain the same budget, increasing per pupil costs and increasing the tax rate. For this hypothetical, let's say they decide to maintain the budget. So with the same budget amount of $3,750,000, but only 225 students, we end up with per pupil spending of $16,667. This increase in per pupil spending has two impacts. The first is fairly obvious for most school board members. A higher per pupil spending number results in a higher local tax rate. The second may be a little less obvious. Remember earlier when we talked about the differing tuition amounts, and in particular, the average announced tuition amount that independent schools can charge? This increase in per pupil spending feeds back into that calculation, pushing the statewide average up and increasing the amount of money that private schools can receive. But it's not just the cost of tuitioning that can push up the average per pupil cost. Every time a line item increases in a local school district budget, an increased burden falls to the education fund. Multiply that by school districts all across the state, and it can have a noticeable impact on per pupil spending. And some of these increases are not the result of local school board decisions. Some come in the form of state or federal mandates, many of which only apply to public schools. Some examples are universal school meals, school employee health benefits as determined by the Commission on Public School Employee Health Benefits, education quality standards, and PCB testing and remediation. All of these items can push up per pupil spending, resulting in an increase in the tuition rate for private schools. For districts that tuition students, what options are available to them if voters turn down a budget or pressure the school board to decrease costs or tax rates? For those districts that tuition some of their students, there are limited options. Their primary recourse comes in reducing costs in the public schools that they do operate. And when 60 to 80% of a school budget comes from costs associated with salaries and benefits, the result can frequently be a reduction in the number of teachers or staff. For those districts that tuition all of their students, the options are even more limited. In 2018, the town of Win Hall, Vermont, which tuitions all of its students, was facing an extraordinary increase in the tax rate, the result of 19 more students than anticipated moving into the district. In an attempt to stem the tax rate increase, voters at town meeting discussed lowering the tuition paid to Burr and Burton from the higher amount they previously authorized to the state average, a decrease of almost $2,000 per student. During the discussion, Seth Bongartz, president of Burr and Burton's Board of Trustees, offered Win Hall both a reprieve and a warning. He offered, quote, "What we're going to do is accept the state average tuition for Win Hall students this year. We have never done this before, and we can never do it again." Relieved residents gave a standing ovation on this news, but also tasked the school board in looking at all future education options, including those that might partially eliminate school choice. As the Win Hall example shows, tax rates are important. When they climb too high, it can put a community in a challenging position. I talked about tax rates earlier in this presentation, but I want to spend a little more time digging deeper into how we determine education tax rates in Vermont and the impact of our current tuitioning system on those tax rates. Vermont education tax rates are based on education spending per pupil, or more accurately, education spending per equalized pupil. An equalized pupil is a way to account for the fact that different types of students cost more or less to educate than others. These weights were the focus of much attention during the 2022 legislative session. The weights that we've been using for years were outdated and didn't reflect the true costs of educating students in public schools. As a result, the legislature passed a law last year establishing new student weights that will go into effect next year. These new student weights cover the following categories: students in poverty, students who are English language learners, students in secondary grade levels, and students in small or rural schools. Many school districts across Vermont stand to benefit from these new weights, as their equalized pupil counts will increase, effectively lowering the tax rate for the same amount of education spending. And the spending per equalized pupil is not only used to determine the local tax rate, it's also used to set the public school's tuition rate. But if you recall from a prior slide, the tuition rate for private schools is different. It is based either on the state average or a higher amount. It's not tied to student weights. Because weighting is not a direct factor in setting tuition amounts to private schools, the end result is that most students are either over or underfunded. And where the private school's tuition is higher than the state average, it's more likely that the student is overfunded. This overfunding of students in private schools is also a result, in part, of private schools' selective enrollment practices. If you watch my previous presentation on the history of tuitioning in Vermont, you'll remember the 2001 court case, St. Johnsbury Academy v. DH, where the court and all parties involved acknowledged that the private school, St. Johnsbury, was not required to accept all students from St. Johnsbury. This factor, coupled with the reality that nearly all private schools have selective enrollment policies, results in those students going to private schools being overfunded. And conversely, because of those selective enrollment practices, many of the more disadvantaged students remain in the public school system. And it's that point that has an impact on tuitioning costs in the state. When private schools selectively enroll students, the result is that students with greater needs and greater costs are disproportionately served by Vermont public schools. Data from the Vermont Agency of Education in 2017 bears this out. Let's look at three different categories of schools: the historic academies, private schools excluding those that specialized in serving special education students, and Vermont public schools. When we look at all of the publicly funded or tuition students, we see that 37% of those students go to the historic academies, 14% to private schools, and 49% to Vermont public schools. If we then look at how many of the publicly funded students are eligible for free and reduced lunch, a measure of poverty, we see 31% are attending the historic academies, 10% are at other private schools, and 59% are in a Vermont public school. And finally, if we look at how many of those publicly funded students are students with disabilities, we see that 27% attend the historic academies, 5% other private schools, and 68% are attending a Vermont public school. A district's tuition configuration can also have an impact on per pupil spending. There are many different tuitioning configurations in Vermont. Districts that operate all grades, districts that tuition all grades, and those that have a combination of both. From Vermont Agency of Education data for fiscal year 23, we see that on average, districts that operate all grades have a lower cost per equalized pupil than those districts that tuition all grades. But what about these other districts that tuition only some of their students? Why are their per pupil costs not as high as those that tuition all of their students? In many cases, it's because they are cutting costs in the elementary levels to make up for the increased spending in the secondary level. Data from the Vermont Agency of Education's fiscal year 23 average announced tuition report bears out this analysis. If we look at a few schools from the area around St. Johnsbury, we see that the St. Johnsbury School District, which tuitions the secondary grades, has a greater disparity in spending between elementary and secondary grades than the other nearby operating districts. There are also financial implications associated with special education funding. In 2018, the legislature passed Act 173, intended to enhance the effectiveness, availability, and equity of services provided to students that need additional support, including students receiving special education services. After being delayed for several years, the law is now in place. Instead of being reimbursed for the costs associated with special education, public school districts in Vermont now receive a block grant of money based on the number of students in the district. This has made budgeting challenging for some school districts that tuition students to private schools. As noted by Legislative Counsel Beth St. James in a presentation to the House Education Committee on January 10th of 2023, the new law allows approved independent schools to bill local public school districts for costs beyond general tuition rates if incurred pursuant to a student's individualized education plan, or IEP. Because of this, some school districts are worried that their block grant will be eaten up by the costs of special education services provided by those private schools, leaving them with insufficient funds to pay for services for the students in their own public schools. In an article that appeared in the Manchester Journal in December of 2020, the Taconic and Green School Board articulated that concern, stating, quote, "We are concerned that special education expenditures for our 9 through 12 students will remain the same, putting excessive budget pressures on our pre-K through 8 system." One final item on tuitioning and education finance. Since Act 68 and adjusted with Act 46 of 2018, Vermont has had a mechanism in place in statute that attempted to control local school district spending by penalizing districts for spending above a certain amount. It's known as the excess spending threshold. The excess spending threshold is calculated annually by the Agency of Education, and the figure is set at 121% of the statewide average education spending per equalized pupil increased by inflation. For districts that spend more than this amount, they are double taxed on the amount over the limit. As cost pressures increase, the excess spending threshold can create challenges for all school districts, but particularly in districts that operate some grades and tuition others. This was the issue back in 2015 when school districts across the state were struggling to craft budgets that fell below the excess spending threshold. Vermont Digger reported that school boards in Linden met with the heads of the Linden Institute and St. Johnsbury Academy to implore them to keep any tuition increases as low as possible. In that same article, the chair of the Linden Town School Board noted that each $800 increase in tuition per high school student will result in a $510 decrease in what can be spent at the K-8 level. A couple of additional notes on the excess spending threshold. One, there is a carve-out in the statute. Districts that tuition all of their students K through 12 and have not voted to pay a higher amount are excluded from the excess spending threshold. And second, it's also important to note that currently this provision of the law is suspended during the implementation of the new pupil weights. The Vermont education financing system is notoriously complex, but I hope that this presentation has been helpful in outlining some of the implications that Vermont's tuition and voucher system has on the cost of education and, as a result, the impact on property tax rates throughout the state. If you're interested in the source data for the presentation, you can find it via the QR code shown here. Thanks for listening and sticking around until the end. I hope that this has been informative.
So I don't typically show you videos that take that much time. However, I think that I'm hopeful that by seeing this video, you can understand why this bill is important to you. So when you're thinking about the impact of those tuitioning dollars and any increases that might happen as a result of more students going to private schools, you could have a pretty significant impact. And Morgan, I'm hoping you can say a few things, and then certainly we're open to questions.
Sure, and I know that was a pretty dense presentation, covered more than the tuitioning piece, which is kind of what we're here to talk about tonight. I will say that at the moment the bill is in Senate. On the Senate side, it's in the committee, the Education Committee, and I believe they're going to take testimony on it on Friday. So for folks who have a lot of free time and like to get on Zoom and watch committee meetings, I think Friday is when they're taking it up. I've been trying to do some modeling for both sides because a change to the tuitioning bill impacts you very differently than it impacts Enosburg-Richford School District, and trying to pull it down to a level that would be tied more to your budget rather than the millions and billions of dollars that Mr. Adele was talking about in this slideshow. I would say roughly, I think for both sides, it's a little bit north of $100,000 moves your tax rate a penny. I think if I could kind of dumb down the tuition part of what he was saying, is that when you take a tuition payment and it goes out of the public school system, that's a straight up expense, and so the kids that you have at Rice, overseas, combined are probably going to add up to about that penny. If they were to continue on in those schools and the law changed so you were not paying their tuition, you would see a decrease, or you would be able to reallocate that money somewhere else. The thing that he doesn't really touch on, which I think impacts you a little stronger than maybe in other places, is even if those kids who are at Rice, if their parents moved them back to Enosburg, if the vouchers went away, you would still be paying tuition on them, but it would reduce that per pupil amount for Enosburg, and so you would actually still be seeing a pretty significant decrease on them. And then, as he pointed out, that decrease ripples through on the average tuition that all the private schools can charge. So there's more that you
Well, I think
want me
that
to touch on.
Well, I think some of the pieces that I think are important also is to remember that private schools currently don't have the same expectations that public schools do around teacher licensing, some of the testing requirements, the accountability measures that are in place, and most importantly, the accessibility for all students. I think that was a really powerful part when they look at the number of students who are served in our public schools who are living in poverty and who receive special ed services, and comparing those, they're more than double in both of those cases, the difference between the two. So if equity is important for us as a state, we have to look at this as, making sure that all students have equitable access to these opportunities. So any questions from the board? Okay. So I'm all done, Mary.
Okay, thank you so much, Lynn. I appreciate it. So we're now moving on to our principal reports. Rhoda, you're up. Is there anything that you would like to highlight from your report?
Not really. Just to add that we will be having our student-led conferences on the 12th and the 19th of April. And as Lynn said, Rachel Huff is going to be our coordinator for LEAPS, and that is a wonderful thing. She's been currently serving in that position as our former person resigned partway through the year. So she's been already starting some great work there, pulling in a lot of community members into different LEAPS activities for kids and increasing all of that. So that's been wonderful to see. Yeah, so it's good. And I apologize for not putting on my video, but I'm sitting here in the dark currently because my power went out. So.
Oh no, hopefully you've got enough battery power on your laptop to make it to the end of the meeting, Rhoda.
Right.
Great, thank you so much. Lenny, anything that you'd like to highlight beyond your spotlight tonight?
I mean, it depends on how much time you want to let me have. No, sorry, I just want to go back and quickly try and remember what I wrote. I think one of the big pieces I highlighted in there was our continuing efforts to increase engagement and community belonging. There's a few different little subcommittees of teams that are working on planning different ways to increase the buzzword being increasing joy at our school, but increasing connectedness, increasing community. One recent thing we did was we had our first whole school community morning meeting. And we're going to start having those happen one Wednesday per month moving forward. And we kind of function like a normal morning meeting would in a small classroom. We did it with the whole school. And a beautiful thing that happened, I told the parents about this. We asked the students, what's something you could do to make the day more positive for your classmates, and one very sweet, kind child said, if I notice somebody who's not feeling good, I'm going to let them know that they're beautiful, because everybody's beautiful and special no matter what. And it melted the house. Even the grumpy middle schoolers were like, oh, that was so nice to say. And I was like, yeah, we all got to work on that. So it was a beautiful moment. I think we're working to build more and more of those community elements that are wonderful at the school that we've lost over the COVID years. I'm excited to see some of these come back and take flight.
Great, thank you so much, Lenny. That's lovely. Sandy, anything that you might like to highlight?
I just have to put in a plug for our Shakespeare performances that are happening tomorrow night and Friday night at 6 o'clock. It's unbelievable how I look out there and that gym has transformed into a castle. It's the set design has been outstanding, thanks to our art teacher, Melissa Haberman, and some parents that are also helping out along the way. But Susie Collins has directed this Shakespeare performance for, I think 30 years-ish. So we haven't done it since COVID. And so this is our first year returning to it. And I'm very excited that it's happening in the next couple nights. So if you're looking for a date night, 6 o'clock at Montgomery Elementary School, and there's a wonderful intermission with dessert bar and everything included. So
That's it for me.
That's great, Sandy. Thank you so much. I'm sure they're going to be amazing performances. Okay, we're up with Sheldon.
So I'll
Lynn,
do.
you want to highlight that?
Yeah, I'll take that. So I think in Sheldon, one of the things that I want to report out about is that the system improvement teams that we put into place, the Sheldon leadership team and the system improvement teams, we're starting to see some good momentum coming out of some of those teams. In particular, there's some exciting stuff coming out of the middle school team. We've been able to find a way to get them out and do some observations, so they've been able to observe the middle school model at both Richford Junior Senior High School and Enosburg Middle School, as one of their charges is to think about with the change that we're going to make in the middle school next year with the additional 2 teachers so that we can right size that middle school. They've been able to look at other models so that they can start from the ground up and think about how they're going to design their model and their schedule, and they're already implementing some of the things that they have seen in some of the other middle schools, and I'm hearing there's good positive energy and enthusiasm about some of the models that they've learned about and had the opportunity to study. So I think we've got some good things happening as a result of those system implementations.
Great, thank you so much, Lynn. So that brings us to board business. We're going to talk about support staff agreement ratification. Lynn or Morgan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I have a summary that I'll go through, and Morgan is emailing. Are you emailing track changes?
I thought we did.
So, I don't know. Had you received the track changes in your email of the support staff? You're gonna get it in just a second if you haven't. I'm gonna give you the overview of the changes that were agreed upon between the union and the bargaining team. One is our support staff did not have access to dental insurance previously, so that is something that was important for both them and for the board, that they have access to that. We made some changes to the placement grid salary, so we were able to add an additional $2.25 to the placement grid, so that brings our starting wage up into a more competitive place. We're really struggling hiring people, and you all know the market. We're competing with the local places like Hannaford's and McDonald's and the gas station and J Peak. So it puts us up into the range of what J Peak is starting people at. So we're at $17.25 effective July 1st. We also had returning staff salary increases, and again, we have been losing quite a few people leaving who've been here for quite some time, who are getting significant increases in other fields. And one of the things that was really important in this process was also to honor the work of our existing support staff members, and the agreement was a pretty substantial raise for them at $2.75 an hour. So that gets them much more into that competitive range than where they were previously. There were some language changes that we agreed to. The wage notifications, moving that up a bit, I believe. It's been so many weeks now, it's a little fuzzy on how much.
We moved up 2 weeks.
Okay, 2 weeks there, and just some, as their hours shift during the year, we've agreed to make sure that we're updating those wage notifications throughout the year. There's a piece where if they don't use all of their CTO time at the end of the year, there's an option for them to be able to access, I think it was 5 days. We could do the CTO buyback of 5 days at that first step, so at the $17.25 an hour. So that was new language. We changed the way that we're giving the CTO days. So rather than doing the accrued and allowing people to go into the hole, accruing it by the number of hours they're working, still works out to the same number of days, but we're doing it upfront. So if you are a school year employee, it's 13 days. It's just a little bit more than what they were able to accrue before. And if you are a full year employee, it's 16 days, which is, I think it's the equivalent of about a third of a day, a little more than a third of a day for each of those increase. There were some other language changes around when we use support staff to cover for teachers or others, and they're asked to sub in their day. So the compensation has increased for that piece. And one of the things that they were concerned about is they really wanted some opportunity to communicate with their leaders about those places they're most comfortable subbing. So we agreed to do a survey each year so that the principals knew that before they made the decisions about assignment. One of the other changes we made was around the micro-credentialing that we have in our support staff agreement. And I think you all know by now how important the alternative programs are that we have in FNESU, and it has been a struggle to find people to work in our alternative programs, and that's really critical. So we were able to offer an additional $2 differential for the people who are working in the alternative programs throughout FNESU. And they asked for a grace period so that when we offer them the summer training, anyone that has the micro-credential, they've just asked for us to give them no less than 30 days to complete the micro-credential, which was an easy thing for us to do. And then the last piece, they really had wanted us to be able to spread their compensation out so that they can get paid over 22 pays. So not quite across the whole summer, but although we were not able to do that, we have added some language so that there's a direct deposit option for them so that they can add a second account. Previously we were only able to do one account, so now they can set it up and spread their pays out through an automatic deposit into a savings. Anything you want to add, Morgan?
I think that is comprehensive.
Okay. So be asking the board to make a motion to ratify the changes to the support staff agreement.
I'll make that motion. By roll, Erin?
Aye.
Miranda?
Aye.
Emily?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Arlene?
Aye.
And Mary? And I.
Actually, I abstain.
Right.
Right.
Thanks, John.
We all get it.
I think that's it on support staff, Mary.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Lynn. So next up, it's time to have our annual conversation about teacher and staff appreciation. We got a lot of great feedback last year that the gift certificates to local businesses were really well received and appreciated. So I just wanted to kick off a conversation and hear from folks what you might be thinking and what we might like to do for this season.
I think it's a great idea, Mary. I heard a lot of positive feedback as well. And I think it's easier than you delivering 8,000 pairs of socks, you and Aaron. So let's go with a gift card.
And it would be helpful, let's see if we could, a little refresher on the businesses that we did last year, and then maybe we can brainstorm what we would like to do for this season. I believe in Montgomery, it was Fire on the Mountain, pizza.
Bakersfield was Westcombe Snack Bar.
Westcombe Snack Bar, okay.
Berkshire was the Barn Owl and Bistro, and Sheldon was the Abbey. And how I remember all those, I don't know.
That's really good.
Okay.
And I went and talked to Mom.
Great, and if I recall correctly, folks were able to pick from whichever of the four. They didn't have to reside in the town or go to the corresponding school, or you work at the corresponding school in that town.
Yeah, they were able to choose, and if they did not pick a gift card, I gave them a gift card for their town. So everybody got
Perfect.
one, whether they filled it out or not.
That's great, thanks Courtney.
You're welcome.
So any thoughts from folks about which businesses in each of the 4 communities that we might like to highlight for this season?
I just think we might want to contact Wescomb's to see if they will be opening before summer.
I do think one of the pieces of the discussion last year was that we rotate it
Be a good
because we wanted to spread the love a little bit, and I do know not only did the teachers receive it well, the local businesses received it very well. They were so appreciative of us spending our money locally and giving them that added business. I think it was really great.
For sure.
Do you want to decide this here, Mary, or do you think that it is maybe a person or two works with Courtney and we just change it up and we create a rotation? If this is something that's working for everybody, maybe we could just continue to do this each year and spread the love around our community as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. And why don't we do a smaller kind of committee if everyone is okay with that and we're not ready to kind of land on particular businesses yet. And, you know, we always need to kind of make sure that the business is interested and willing also. So I would be fine having a smaller committee to work with Courtney on this if the board feels comfortable with that. So I don't mind working with Courtney on it, and is there anyone else who'd like to join me in that?
I don't mind.
Miranda, okay, sweet. So Miranda, Mary, and Courtney, and we'll make sure that we let everyone else know where we land with business choices and such. Great. So we can pick it up via email, maybe the 3 of us.
Sounds good.
Perfect. Okay, that is great. So, Lynn, next up we've got this essential work of school boards from the VSBA, the policy.
So this is really brief. This is something Mary and I talked about in our pre-meeting. There's a toolkit for school boards in the state of Vermont that the VSBA puts out, and some of the essential duties and responsibilities are specific to the district boards, and some are specific to the FNESU board. So we don't need to spend a lot of time going through this unless you want, but I wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to remind yourself or learn for the first time if you're relatively new, the board's responsibility around policy and the superintendent's responsibility around policy. So each of these that I'm going to bring to you in the next few months will clearly articulate the difference between your responsibility and the superintendent's responsibility. So I'm going to put those as live links each month into your packet. So I'm wondering if any of you have any questions about this one. I see that Arlene has her new book. I'm hoping.
I got it last year. Yeah.
I ordered those for everyone. I don't know if they're going to your house or if I'm going to end up getting them.
And Lynn, I had a quick question, correct me if I'm wrong, aren't there a few policies that even supersede kind of the policy committee and the superintendent and the board and are kind of come down from the state and they're adopted universally across all public schools? Or am I wrong?
Specific
am I
to
misunderstanding?
policy?
I feel as
That might be rules. Those might be like AOE level rules or statutory expectations.
yeah. Okay. But so policy is always done on an individual district and SU level or at that level?
Yeah, I think that some of those are required policies. The VSBA has a really good tool for us to use now of making sure that we understand the required policies, the policies that are recommended, and then the policies that they just have samples of that are optional. So we try really hard to make sure that we're looking and seeing that our policies at least reach the minimum expectations set by those VSBA model policies, because as you know from reviewing these, there are several legal components in some of these policies that are required by statute.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that was what I was kind of getting at, that kind of interface with statutory, requirements and rules.
So if there are no other questions, I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay. So any future agenda items that we know of now? There's always time to add them later. Our next meeting is May 3rd. We have no SU board representative report this month because we didn't have a meeting in March. Anything else tonight from anyone? Okay, then I will make a motion to adjourn. Thank you all so much. Appreciate everyone being here. I'll do that by roll. Erin?
Aye.
Lisa?
Aye.
Miranda?
Aye.
Emily?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, I'll vote on this one. I'm good.
Arlene?
Aye.
All right, folks, thank you so much. Drive safely home, those of you who are on the road.